What's up everybody, my name's Mr. Smith and you're watching the Top Speed Needs Awards. If you're new here, normally we go over all the most important and relevant automotive news all in 10 minutes or less. But today, it's going to be a little bit different. That being because today is officially the first ever annual Top Speed Needs Awards, where we're going to be taking a look at the top 5 picks that we thought could potentially be Car of the Year. For full context, these are all vehicles that actually came out and got into the hands of drivers in 2022. So even if they were maybe announced in 2020, 2021, as long as they actually went into the hands of drivers this year, they count towards the potential contender list. Which once again, we narrowed down to 5 vehicles. The way this is going to work is first we're going to go over those contenders that I previously mentioned, and right after that we're going to be officially crowning the first ever Top Speed Needs Car of the Year, with the community pick being discussed first and our pick being discussed right after that. With that being said, I'm excited to kick this series off, and let's get into the first ever Top Speed Needs Awards. In no particular order, first on the list we're going to be talking about the 2022 Ford Bronco Raptor. With the 418 horsepower that this thing has compared to the normal 275 horsepower that the base Bronco has, this thing is, for one, insanely powerful. And on top of that, as you could imagine by the look of this thing, it's insanely off-road capable, with the fender flares and everything else that goes along with this thing being an insane off-road vehicle. And if you thought that was a little crazy, on top of that, combined with that factor, the roof height is about 4.8 inches taller, making the Bronco, which to begin with is a pretty wide and tall vehicle, even more wide and tall, which is just insane to wrap your head around. Now, if you've not been fortunate enough to see this car, this vehicle, this truck, I guess you could call it, in real life, I can tell you personally, after seeing it at the Chicago Auto Show, actually right after it came out, this thing is truly a beast. I mean, to kind of wrap your head around the size of this vehicle, being what it is, it's kind of crazy. And seeing it on the road, which I actually did for the first time not too long ago, is even more surreal. This car is one that personally was definitely up there when it comes to choosing the Top Speed Needs Car of the Year, due to everything I've already mentioned, combined with its road presence, and is, to be quite blunt, I mean, one of the best vehicles I think Ford has ever released. Taking something that's like a Jeep Wrangler competitor, right, and combining that with this insane off-road package that is the Raptor, that's manifested itself in, obviously, the pickup truck form for a little over 10 years now, is crazy, right? And the idea that they actually pulled this off, that they actually put these massive fender flares that they couldn't even paint in their factories, which is why they're black for those of you who didn't know, on a car like this, is something that I can't quite wrap my head around. And it's something that, again, I almost never expected from Ford. When the Bronco first came out, my first thought was that they most likely have a Raptor version eventually, but obviously no one knew what that would look like. So to see this, right, and for them to announce it, and for this to be what they announced that they're releasing, I was just insanely hyped up, as I am probably for most of these cars, as you are going to be able to see. And it's one that I could not leave off this list, because I mean, look at this thing. It's insane. Now obviously this thing isn't going to cost you a pretty penny. It is not cheap by any means, being at about 68 grand, which is obviously much more than the base Bronco. But considering this thing is what it is, and on top of that, its main competitor is obviously the 392, which is, if you didn't know, Jeep Wrangler's sort of competitor for this segment-ish, at least when it comes to being a general off-road vehicle, and on top of that, having a lot of horsepower. With that car being about 80-ish grand, a little over that, this is not that bad of a price at all. And quite frankly, if they were listed at about the same price, I would still probably go with the Bronco. But considering that this thing is that much cheaper, it's almost a no-brainer. And I believe that as time goes on, we're going to see that the Bronco is going to end up outselling the 392. And the 392 is going to be a car that is a bit more rare, and is one that I can confidently say is most likely going to be probably higher up in value when it comes to kind of long-term price ranges. The next contender is going to be an electric sedan that made its price point not that bad compared to the S-Class, and introduced itself into a segment that on one end is growing, and on the other end is dying. That being the new BMW i7. The BMW i7 is extremely interesting due to the fact that, obviously, with the rise of SUV popularity, not a lot of people are getting sedans. But on the other end of things, obviously a lot of people are buying electric vehicles now. What's also interesting about this vehicle is that instead of something like an XC40 Recharge, which is sort of like on its own sort of realm of things, this car is basically an S-Class competitor, directly that is, while being, as I said before, an EV, which I think introduces some complications that some people may like, some people may not, but definitely makes it interesting nonetheless. I mean, especially with the S-Class being about 114 grand MSRP and this being about 119, it definitely introduces, a thought in some people's minds that maybe wasn't there before, about whether they want to get an EV or not, and what purpose they have for making that decision. Now, obviously, there's all sorts of criticisms with EVs, along with plenty of other types of vehicles, but one thing you cannot take away from an EV is the fact that it is very quiet. And if you were to combine that with, let's say, insane installation, which you definitely could for 119 grand, it's going to introduce a luxury factor that you can't exactly replicate with an internal combustion engine car. Obviously, we have the Maybachs of the world and the S-Classes, and as we talked about previously, the Rolls-Royce Phantoms, which have pretty good noise isolation as it is. But there's always still going to be certain things that you're going to have to work around to achieve that. And what an electric motor does is sort of negate that. Right, you don't have the same noise that you normally would with an internal combustion engine, which definitely gives this thing a very interesting dynamic. Along with that, this thing is incredibly luxurious. It has a massive screen in the back, which is not something we've ever seen with any car, even your mom's '07 minivan. And it's a car that I truly believe deserves a spot on the contenders list, due to the fact that it very well could be, depending on how Mercedes decides to execute potentially an electric S-Class, the flagship sedan for someone who's looking to spend money in this price range. On top of that, it has 536 horsepower, which is not terrible for a car that has about 6,000 pounds of weight, and has about 296 miles of range, which obviously isn't great compared to the normal 350 to 400 plus that an internal combustion engine car would get, on average that is. But it's also not that bad, and it's pretty good for the EVs that we've seen. Although obviously there is the price range that, guarantee something like this to happen. But regardless, this is definitely a car that is, as I discussed before, insanely luxurious, is pretty good when it comes to styling, I'd say. A lot of people think the new front end is ugly. I personally think it looks great. And it's a car that I believe will go down in history as the first of what will be most likely many flagship electric luxury sedans. And will kind of pioneer the sort of media integration when it comes to putting, again, massive screens in the back, and take that even further, right? As far as that could possibly go, which makes this car that much better. Next, we got the Rivian R1T. After seeing this in person at a state competition I went to earlier this year, around April or May, I can say that this is a truck that truly does live up to the hype that's sort of been proposed for it. Yes, there's obviously been the recalls that we've discussed previously, but overall, this truck as a whole is truly incredible to play with, to kind of look around, and to experience in real life. Obviously, it looks cool. It looks intricate, right? It looks very, very nice when you see it on photos. But to see this truck in person with its gear tunnel, with, its LED lights, everything about it is truly incredible. Especially due to the fact that weighing in at 7,100 pounds, it has a 0 to 60 of about 3 seconds, with 835 horsepower and 908 pound-feet of torque, along with a towing capacity of about 11,000 pounds. This truck is one that, when you see it, even on the road, is insane, but when you see it on a track, blows your mind away. And it's a truck that, even when you go on the inside, right, even being the pretty utilitarian thing that it is very luxurious, is full of tech that I would even argue beats a Tesla, while also, again, having that practicality that a lot of vehicles don't have. Right, as much as I love an EQS, when you look at an EQS, you don't think practical, right? To any higher of degree than you would with an S-Class, which is still sort of what it's trying to be in a sense, while still sort of being its own vehicle-ish. When you put an EQS next to a Rivian R1T, it would be hard for me, at least, to even think about choosing the EQS. I was personally able to walk around this vehicle, I got a whole tour of this vehicle, and when you see it, as I said before, in real life, it's something that you only want to experience again, and is making for a truck that is incredible to potentially daily drive, which is something that is definitely an insane thing to be able to do, and it's something that I believe most people, if they knew about this car, would be on board with. Second to last, we're going to be going over the 2023 Nissan Z, which has, as you can see here, a literal katana etched into the design, along with a horsepower to price ratio that really outbeats everything in its segment. What's great about the Nissan Z is that you are truly getting what you pay for, right? A lot of cars, some kind of run on a platform that maybe they don't fully live up to the hype of, or they maybe sort of partially do, but not to the extent that people may have hoped, right? But this is a car that you can confidently say is what it claims to be, which is a small little Japanese sports car that has a nice amount of power and is going to be fun to daily drive if you really need to do that. Although I'm not sure how many people are daily driving this car. Now when it comes to the price of this vehicle and the horsepower number that it outputs, this is definitely a highlight of this vehicle. Obviously it handles pretty well, but it's not an absolute track demon. It's nothing like a Viper ACR or anything that would be that much better than it, but when it comes to horsepower, this thing has about 400 horsepower, which is 135 more than the base Supra. And mind you, the Supra starts at about $3,500 more than the Z, meaning that for less money, you can get a car that is that much faster, is potentially that much more fun to drive, and looks the way it does. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of the way the Supra looks. I'm personally someone who, while everyone else was kind of, thinking it looked terrible compared to the old one, was standing up for it and liked the design and the way it looks. Now when you compare the designs, obviously the Nissan Z has more of a futuristic, sleek type look to it. When Supra goes for more of the traditional little Japanese style sports car look. But nonetheless, this is definitely a poster car. I can tell you personally, and prove to you personally, that this is a poster car. And it's a vehicle that I truly believe is one of the best bangs for your buck you can truly get. I can say that confidently. Along with that, in a market that's gearing more and more towards EVs, hybrids, 4-cylinders that are turbocharged for whatever reason, this thing has a 3.0 liter V6, which makes it that much more fun and that much more of a car that I feel like enthusiasts are truly going to like long term. And although I don't think it's getting as much credit as it should as of yet, I believe that it definitely will eventually, and it's a car that I think definitely deserves the utmost respect from every enthusiast. Even though it is technically riding on a lot of the same stuff as the 370Z, which was the last generation model. Last but not least, we're going to be going over the 2023 Chevy Corvette Z06 equipped with the Z07 package, which I can confidently say is definitely now my dream car. This thing, for those of you who aren't aware, is the most powerful Corvette ever, which means a lot, right? And it stands for a lot of what the brand of Corvette tries to encompass. When you think about the original designers and the creators of the C1 Corvette, you can only help but think what the reaction would be to this insane vehicle, right? Something that can be equipped with a carbon fiber wing, carbon fiber wheels, something that has a flat plane crank V8, something that has an interior that looks straight out of an exotic sports car, and something that, straight up looks the way it does. This is a car that I can genuinely and wholeheartedly argue is the first ever of its kind being an American exotic supercar. Because obviously the original Corvette C8, that is nice, even though it had about 150 less horsepower than this one does. That car, which was my old dream car, truly cannot compare to the level of, performance, looks, and overall just road presence that this thing truly does encompass. When you look at this thing coming down the road, and let's say you don't know about cars, about automotives, anything like that, this is a car that you're definitely gonna think is an exotic Ferrari of some sort, right? Is Lamborghini's new creation. And I'm very proud of, only due to the fact that before this, we never really had a true car to compete with things like the 458, right? With things like the Aventador. And now this thing can lap a Huracan, right? If you watch different tests that this thing is in, if you watch different races that this thing is involved in, you can truly see the performance that this thing actually outputs. And on top of that, it has quad exhaust, right? Which makes this thing even better. It makes this thing sound even better than otherwise would. Another great thing about this, and the reason why I do think that this is going to go on to be a car that a lot of enthusiasts collect, and a car that a lot of people enjoy, and a car that is going to go up insanely so in value, is the fact that this is most likely the last of its kind. Again, as we discussed earlier, the market is gearing towards electric vehicles. It is gearing towards hybrids. It is gearing towards 4-cylinders, right? So to have a car that has a flat plane crank V8 is a rarity. And it's a rarity, I should say, that I think will be just that, and will be extremely rare to see in the forthcoming months, years, and decades that we see going forward. What this Corvette represents is the last and the pinnacle of sports cars, American specifically, especially with cars like the Hellcat and the Scat Pack going out of production, those being obviously Challengers and Chargers, and will go down in history truly as one of the greatest vehicles Chevy has ever produced, and one that most likely we will never see again. From Chevy, from probably any American manufacturer, and will be one of the last supercars, true supercars, with at least a V8, right, in production. Especially considering the next Aventador replacement, for instance, is going to be a hybrid, which they've announced. With that being said, and all the contenders laid out for you guys, let's go over the community pick for TSN Car of the Year. With 60% of the vote on the community poll we did, we have the 2023 Corvette Z06 with the Z07 package. Being supported in the comments by Rails of Chicago and Beyond with quote-unquote, Corvette baby, American made for the win. Last but not least, we're going to be going over and crowning the first ever 2022 TSN Car of the Year, being also the 2022 Corvette C8 Z06 with the Z07 package. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Top Speed Needs. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe button, like the video, and also turn on bell notifications so you never miss an upload. I also want to announce that this will in fact, due to the holidays, be my last video of 2022, so I will see you in 2023. And with that being said, tune in next time for your Top Speed Needs.